When we first encounter the March family in Little Women, they are defined by a singular, overwhelming characteristic, their genteel poverty. They lack money, fine clothes, and lavish comforts, yet they possess a wealth of love, morality, and spiritual richness. This lack of material wealth is instantly reframed by the narrative not as a burden, but as a moral advantage. For generations of readers, the March family has stood as the beautiful, enduring symbol of the triumph of virtue over materialism. The core philosophical proposition of the novel is simple: we are poor, but we are morally superior to the rich. This idea, this central myth of noble poverty, is the emotional bedrock of the entire story. It gives meaning to their struggles, justifies their sacrifices, and provides a moral hierarchy where their humble home is a palace of virtue compared to the cold opulence of the wealthy. But in the Emotive Archive, we must look beyond the sentimentality and ask the difficult question: is the March family's noble poverty a beautiful truth, or is it, in reality, a toxic, disabling lie? We argue that the novel's glorification of their struggle is a dangerous form of poverty romanticization, a narrative device that actively discourages self-interest and financial autonomy, ultimately crippling the March sisters' ability to survive and thrive independently. This philosophy, largely perpetuated by Marmee, is presented as wisdom, but functions as a sophisticated mechanism of patriarchal control wrapped in moral instruction. The chief preacher of this philosophy is Marmee, the moral anchor of the family. Marmee's teaching consistently equates financial ambition with spiritual degradation. Any desire for material gain, whether Amy's yearning for fine clothes or Joe's urge to earn quick money, is treated as a moral failing, a selfish vice that must be battled and overcome. The goal she sets for her daughters is not to escape poverty, but to endure it gracefully and to find spiritual fulfillment in their constant state of lack. This creates a deeply damaging psychological barrier. To seek wealth is to betray the family's core virtue. The hypocrisy of this dependence is stark, yet conveniently ignored by the narrative. The March family does not exist solely on the strength of their moral virtue, they survive thanks to the continuous, necessary patronage of the wealthy, the gruff, yet ultimately generous, Aunt March, and the kind, protective Mr. Lawrence. The novel demonizes the rich in the abstract, but relies entirely on specific wealthy individuals for survival. The sisters are taught that money is tainted, but they are constantly forced to accept the tainted money to keep the household running. Consider the famous Christmas breakfast scene, often cited as the epitome of their moral superiority. They sacrifice their own planned meal to give it to the desperately poor Hummel family. While the act itself is charitable, the narrative framing is crucial. It is a staged performance of their nobility, an act that solidifies their identity as good sufferers. The message reinforced is that their highest purpose is not to improve their own condition, but to exchange their suffering for spiritual merit. This scene is a prime example of the narrative's use of poverty as a tool for moralizing, essentially performing poverty porn for the reader. The most profound danger of this noble poverty philosophy is that it disables the girls from achieving financial autonomy. Marmee teaches her daughters how to mend, how to save pennies, and how to manage scarcity. She does not teach them how to navigate the economic marketplace, how to invest, or how to demand equitable wages. Their education focuses on values, not on valuable skills. Joe's struggle directly illuminates this failure. Joe's one successful foray into the marketplace, writing sensational fiction, is instantly condemned by Professor Bear and viewed with suspicion by the family. Joe is forced to choose between artistic purity, writing true but unprofitable work, and economic survival, writing trash that pays the bills. The March Code demands she choose purity, thus sacrificing her only reliable path to independent wealth. Her self-worth becomes tied to her artistic struggle, rather than her economic success. This crippling value system ensures that Joe, the most ambitious and worldly daughter, cannot achieve true independence without reliance on external figures, first Bear, and later, the inheritance of Plumfield, which is, ironically, a piece of inherited wealth. This entire framework of noble poverty creates a cycle of genteel suffering. By instilling shame around materialism and ambition, Marmee guarantees that her daughters, like herself, will remain perpetually reliant on the kindness of others. They are conditioned to accept their station, rather than fight to change it. Their emotional labor, their goodness, their patience, their quiet virtue, becomes their only perceived currency, a currency they trade for patronage and moral validation, ensuring they never challenge the wealthy hierarchy they are taught to morally despise. The tragedy is that their moral richness is built upon a foundation of economic quicksand, a foundation they are taught to never actively try and escape. The most damning critique of the March family's noble poverty is its practical outcome. The philosophy actively disables the daughters from securing genuine financial autonomy. Marmee and Mr. March, despite their kind intentions, equip their children primarily with a moral compass rather than a map for economic survival. They teach them how to endure scarcity with grace, but not how to effectively dismantle the economic insecurity that plagues them. The lesson is always about managing lack, never about generating wealth. This systemic failure is tragically clear in the fate of Meg. Meg chooses love, marrying John Brooke, a man of modest means. Her decision, lauded as romantic and virtuous, immediately plunges her into a life of financial anxiety. Meg, despite being the eldest and most domestic, struggles relentlessly with budgeting, debt, and the constant stress of making ends meet. The novel presents this struggle as a refining process, a test of her love and virtue, but from a realistic perspective, it is a consequence of her lack of economic preparation and the family's toxic conditioning. Meg was taught that domestic sacrifice was noble, but she wasn't taught the necessary skills to prevent that sacrifice from becoming a source of chronic despair. She was not equipped to negotiate the demands of a modern, financially strained marriage. The March family's code creates a crippling fear of economic ambition. Joe's brief, lucrative career writing thrillers is a healthy, radical response to their poverty, a genuine attempt to claim financial power. Yet, bears moral critique, which aligns perfectly with Marmee's core teaching, effectively halts her independence. The message Joe internalizes is that her most powerful, financially rewarding writing is morally corrupt. To be a good woman, she must return to writing safe, virtuous literature for children, work that is less profitable and securely contained within the moral boundaries set by male authority figures. This is how the noble poverty philosophy ensures that Jo, the most rebellious spirit, sacrifices her professional potential to maintain her moral standing. This philosophy is particularly insidious because it subtly reinforces a patriarchal structure under the guise of morality. The women are taught to avoid the rough, transactional world of finance and capitalism, leaving them entirely reliant on the men, first Mr. March, then Mr. Lawrence, and finally their husbands. Their labor is reduced to emotional currency. The March sisters exchange their goodness, their constant emotional support, and their quiet service for financial patronage. This unpaid emotional labor is their primary contribution to the economy of their class, cementing their role as dependents. However, one sister stands out as the singular voice of reason and the only one who clearly identifies the noble poverty lie for what it is, Amy March. Amy, often vilified for her materialism, is the only one who genuinely understands the economic reality of their situation. She observes Meg's struggle and Joe's constant frustration, and she rejects the moralizing. Amy sees money not as the root of all evil, but as the necessary tool for freedom, autonomy, and the pursuit of art. Her desire to marry rich is not purely selfish, it is a calculated, pragmatic act of self-preservation, a healthy rejection of the genteel suffering that consumed Beth and crippled Meg. Amy's success in securing her European trip and ultimately marrying Laurie is the narrative's greatest inadvertent indictment of the family's philosophy. Amy achieves freedom precisely because she defies the core tenet of noble poverty. She uses the very tools, social leverage, calculated ambition, and a clear understanding of class, that her mother condemned. Her journey proves that to escape the cycle of genteel suffering, one must abandon the romantic pretense of moral superiority and embrace the hard-nosed reality of economic strategy. The toxic lie of noble poverty works best on those who are kindest and least demanding, ensuring that the burden of sacrifice falls most heavily on the purest soul, Beth, and the most fiercely loyal, Joe. The philosophy is a subtle form of control, guaranteeing that the March daughters would never pose a real threat to the economic or social status quo. The most tragic exhibit in our critique of noble poverty is Beth March. If the March family's philosophy is a toxic lie, Beth is the most devastating and innocent victim of that deception. Her death, often romanticized in the novel as a sorrowful yet sublime departure, the passing of a soul too pure for the material world, is, when viewed realistically, the direct and cruel cost of their economic idealism. Beth's profound lack of ambition is precisely what her family and the narrative most admire. She harbors no material desires, she asks for nothing, and she actively shrinks her identity to fit the role of the quiet homemaker. This self-erasure, while lauded as spiritual purity, is, in a pragmatic sense, a dangerous personal and economic surrender. She is anti-ambition in a world that demands a fierce struggle for existence. Beth falls fatally ill after selflessly caring for the impoverished Hummel family. This moment of altruism, though morally beautiful, is a direct consequence of the March family's moral economy. They constantly engage in emotional and social exchanges, acts of charity, kindness, and moral service, without possessing the necessary economic or material buffers to protect themselves from the risks inherent in poverty. Beth's exposure to illness and hardship is not a random tragic event, it is the inevitable outcome of a lifestyle that values unprotected sacrifice over basic safety and health. The narrative romanticizes Beth's poverty and illness, viewing her physical decline as proof of her spiritual elevation. She is presented as the perfect woman because she has no needs and makes no demands on the family's scarce resources or on society. This creates a deeply troubling and dangerous message. For women, physical suffering and sickness become proof of moral and spiritual purity. Beth becomes the highest moral authority because she requires nothing. Her martyrdom is a validation of the entire family's choice to remain nobly poor. Furthermore, Beth's constant role as the family's source of emotional comfort and stability is another form of unpaid emotional labor that she provides until her very last breath. She is the psychological glue, but she is never encouraged to develop her musical talent professionally or seek a path to independent self-fulfillment. When she dies, the immense emotional void she leaves behind is palpable, but she never had the opportunity to live a life claimed entirely for herself. The final, hypocritical truth of the noble poverty lie is revealed in the novel's conclusion. The March family only achieves true, lasting stability and the realization of their lofty ideals, namely, the establishment of Joe's beloved Plumfield School, through two acts of blatant materialism. Firstly, Amy marries Laurie, securing the very kind of immense wealth and social standing that Marmee's philosophy subtly condemned as vulgar. Amy secures the economic foundation. Secondly, Joe inherits Aunt March's estate and property, utilizing a source of money derived from the harsh, capitalist system they had spent the entire novel morally despising. The necessary capital for their collective happiness and moral endeavors, like running a progressive school, does not come from their own moral struggle or virtue, it comes from the very wealth they were taught to disdain. This proves the final, unromantic truth: morality cannot pay the bills, and freedom requires an economic foundation. Little Women is not a story of moral victory over materialism. It is a story of good people trapped in an insidious class cycle, taught that accepting and glorifying their struggle is nobler than fighting to change their economic reality. The romanticization of the March family's poverty is an invisible barrier that ensured they remained perpetually reliant on patronage, preventing them from achieving the secure, self-determined life they deserved. The cost of that delusion was Beth's life and the lifelong compromises of her sisters. We have traced the toxic lie of noble poverty through the lives of the March sisters. We saw the fatal consequence in Beth's self-sacrifice, the stifling limitation in Joe's contained ambition, and the financial anxiety in Meg's domestic life. The ultimate truth is that the March family's cherished moral code, intended to protect them from the corruption of wealth, instead left them economically disarmed and perpetually dependent. From a modern lens, their noble poverty is revealed as a self-defeating ideology, a form of moral arrogance that blinded them to the necessary truth that financial security is the bedrock of personal autonomy. Their greatest failure was not the lack of money itself, but the romanticization of that lack. By teaching their daughters that to want more was to be less virtuous, Marmee and the narrative created a psychological disability against ambitious, productive self-interest. This is precisely why Amy March, the sister who openly rejected the noble poverty lie, emerges as the most essential figure for the contemporary reader. Amy's pragmatism, her calculation, her social maneuvering, and her unapologetic pursuit of financial leverage, was not selfishness, it was the only healthy, survival-driven response to the family's toxic philosophy. She recognized that independence requires capital, and that dignity cannot be sustained on moral platitudes alone. Her ultimate success, married to wealth and free to pursue art without financial fear, is the novel's strongest, albeit unintended, argument against the very code the Marches lived by. The enduring lesson of the March family's financial struggle is one of profound urgency. Morality and virtue do not pay the bills, but economic freedom pays for the choice to be virtuous. Had Jo possessed true financial independence from the start, she could have maintained her radical voice without submitting to Bear's moral censorship. Had Beth not been trapped by poverty, she might have had access to better care and a life defined by her music, not her sacrifice. We must break this cycle of admiration for struggle. The true rebellion against the 19th century constraint is not artistic chaos, but disciplined, strategic self-determination. We must abandon the shame associated with financial ambition and view money as the crucial tool of protection and self-mastery. Our critique of the toxic romanticization of poverty now gives sharp economic clarity to the personal choices of the March sisters. We now understand the immense pressure that forced Jo to compromise, which brings us to the final, most passionate segment of our analysis, the emotional labor demanded by those closest to her. We now turn to the friend zone fallacy, where we will dissect the relationship that Jo fought hardest to escape, the suffocating, entitled pursuit of Laurie Lawrence. If Jo's biggest compromise was marrying Bear, her greatest act of self-preservation was the radical clarity with which she rejected Laurie. We will argue that Laurie's romantic persistence was, in fact, a form of toxic emotional demand that threatened to plunge Jo into a chaos even more destructive than noble poverty itself. The enduring message is clear: the romanticizing of poverty is the gilded cage, the romanticizing of sacrifice is the lock. You must choose self-preservation and the fight for economic freedom. If this analysis of the March family's toxic financial philosophy resonated with you, and you are ready to dismantle the romantic myths surrounding this classic, hit the like button, and subscribe to the Emotive Archive for our final, sharpest critique. We ask you, what is one romanticized belief about money or sacrifice that you consciously reject in your own life to secure your freedom? Share your thoughts below.